When we look at what went wrong for the Russians in the Battle of Kiev and other battles in the Northwest, so much went wrong. Why did our military and intelligence specialists fail to spot it?
I think not everybody, by the way. You can go back, I'm on the record in the Atlantic saying that I didn't believe that they would take Kiev, much less be able to control it. But I've had some experience in urban combat, and I realized how challenging it was going to be, even if they could get to the outskirts of Kiev, and they barely did, really. They were barely within artillery range of the center part of the city. But there were so many challenges that they had. What we didn't realize is that the equipment advances that they had, in a sense, advertised. You know, they've talked about the secure communications capability that they have, or the drones, or the cyber, all these different capabilities. And it turns out they just don't have that many of them. The communication system failed, which meant that generals had to move in their vehicles up to the front or get out and walk up to the front to find out what's going on. Why are we stopped? What's happening? And that's when very skilled Ukrainian snipers, developed by U.S. Special Operations Forces and some other government agencies' personnel, just picked them off one by one. I mean, the number of generals they've lost is staggering, not to mention the number of battalion and brigade and regimental commanders. The individual soldiers just haven't been trained all that well. Very basic tasks, such as staying dispersed during movement, moving into wood lines very quickly when you stop. Obviously, that hasn't been present. And of course, we can see all this for ourselves because individuals are taking videos of this with smartphones and with drones and then putting them on social media. So the context is, this is, I think, the first war in which almost everything is videoed and uploaded to open source platforms. And that is quite dramatic, and it puts it on display. But the bottom line is that we had not seen the Russians really do any large operations in recent memory. They did do the operations against Grozny and Chechnya back in near the end of the previous century. But if you really look back at that, what they essentially did was, after losing in their initial encounters, they would just destroy entire blocks of Grozny. I mean, they basically destroyed Grozny, depopulated it to take control of it. In Syria, they did indeed help the murderous Bashar al-Assad stay in power, but they did it with air power in a situation where there was very little opposition to them, virtually no air defenses on the side of those they were bombing to smithereens in Aleppo. And again, what they did in Aleppo was essentially destroy huge parts of the city, depopulating them of those that were opposing the Bashar al-Assad regime. It was not their soldiers on the ground in that case. It was Syrian forces, Hezbollah, and some Shia militia that Iran had trained, equipped, and funded to fight in Syria. So we'd not seen them perform big operations, and yet we knew that they had, quote, modernized their force very substantially, literally on display at various junctures over the years, only to find out that they really didn't modernize all that much of their force. When you look at the sinking of the Moskva, for example, it's very clear that the kinds of upgrades that are necessary for fire suppression, for shutting off portions of a ship that are flooding, and the training of their sailors to combat that kind of challenge, all of that was lacking. And that's why their flagship is now in the bottom of the Black Sea.
How big is the danger now that if Russia's conventional forces continue to perform badly, then Mr. Putin resorts to battlefield nuclear weapons to defeat Ukraine?
I tend to think it is a threshold that he will not cross because of the enormous response of the world. And, I'm not going to try to define what severe would mean. That's what the U.S. administration has said, the way it has characterized the response that would follow such use of nuclear weapons. But it would be very, very substantial. If he thinks that his economy is under enormous pressure now, it's already essentially in default on the foreign debts that it owes. If he thinks his financial system is in trouble, his inner circle is under pressure, and the business community is shutting down, just wait until he tries that. And that's what we have to make sure that he understands would follow crossing the nuclear threshold, or perhaps even use of chemical weapons. And again, it's hard to say whether he has the capability to use effective or tactically significant chemical weapons. We know he has no compunction about using them because, of course, he's used a nerve agent on Navalny, tried to kill Skripal that way in the UK, and did indeed kill someone in the UK in years preceding that. But whether he has that capability militarily is not certain. Well, it ends with enormous damage having been done to Ukraine and Ukrainian nationalism at an all-time high. The irony here is, of course, that he has done more to be a catalyst to stoke Ukrainian nationalism than any other development since the end of the Soviet Union. In trying to make Russia great again, he's actually made the Ukrainians great. He's also made NATO great again in a big way. I mean, now even is faced by the prospect of two countries that have never joined NATO, Finland and Sweden, potentially joining NATO. Beyond that, of course, he's done enormous, perhaps irrevocable damage to various sectors of his economy, to his financial system, to the best and brightest in his population, and to those most indebted to him, his inner circle. How does he get out of this? Presumably, he's going to declare victory at some point and go home, and he's trying to achieve something in the Southeast that might enable him to do that. But it ends badly, is the bottom line. There's no happy ending here whatsoever. It's just how bad will the ending be for his neighbor and a former republic in the USSR, and for his own home country. Well, first of all, I don't know that what we're seeing in Ukraine is necessarily the conflict of the future at all. In fact, arguably, it's more of a conflict of the previous century than it is of this century, albeit with certain capabilities present in greater numbers and in greater significance than in the past. But at the end of the day, what the experience in Ukraine is validating, I think, are lessons that we have learned in the past about the importance of getting the strategy right. They didn't have unity of command. They had three different commanders all fighting for resources. They didn't have units that were actually trained well. It's a mystery to me what the Russians were actually doing during these endless maneuvers and training exercises that they were having on the borders of Ukraine for so many months leading up to the invasion. It's very clear they didn't train to the kinds of standards that we would expect our forces to train to. Their command control communications broke down.